Hello and welcome to Shanalytics episode 40. I have one of my original guests, Jack Hammer, on the show, obviously an all 49ers OG. You're working for the Press Democrat now. You've been doing that for this past season, Jack. Um, Obviously, last few days have been interesting. A lot of news and noise, I would say, as well, coming out from the 49ers right now. But for everyone who's watching, if you haven't already, make sure you like, make sure you subscribe. Make sure you click the notifications so you can see every single time I go live. I see people in the comments already. Swan Song. I don't know what you're saying there, but I appreciate you jumping in, man. You're always in the streams. And then, of course, Kim, what's up? How you doing? I know you're always watching all the streams, man. So you're super supportive. It's great to see you in here. But, Jack, it's certainly been an interesting last 48 hours, really, with Jimmy Garoppolo. Obviously, there's some news that's been coming out recently about the extent of his shoulder injury that he sustained against the Cowboys. A little more serious than even I think anyone thought up until 2 days ago. It's going to require surgery, which it's weird. I think we all anticipated Garoppolo needing some kind of surgery, but we all thought it was going to be the thumb, and now all of a sudden it's the shoulder. So what do you make of this kind of new update with his injury status?
It's interesting because I agree with you. I think all of us thought it was going to, if there was going to be a surgery, it was going to be the thumb. And then you think back and you start to read back some of the comments. And at one point he was asked about, it was after the Dallas game, I believe. And he was asked what hurts worse, the shoulder or the thumb. And he said, yes, because both of them were hurting. And they asked him on February 1st during his last press conference with the 49ers, he was asked about surgery, and he said that they were going to try to avoid it at all costs, but we'll see. So that kind of plays along with the fact that it's taken till now. Seems like it was one of those situations where let's see if this thing can calm down on its own and heal on its own or not. And it didn't. So they've chosen to go this route. And I think the biggest takeaway for me today was John Lynch making the statement that he hasn't even talked to Jimmy Garoppolo yet. I think for me that he had a very long, because that was the second question he was asked in his press conference with the national media. He had a very long answer, and right at the end he says, "I don't know, I haven't even talked to Jimmy yet, though. So we'll see." I mean, so he basically said, and he even said, "I don't know anything more than you," and so that right there fits everything that we've seen between Jimmy Garoppolo and the 49ers this year when it comes to injuries. It's constantly been the 49ers saying one thing and Garoppolo saying another. Why not finish it off that way as well?
Well, and I think that's the funny thing, because at the beginning of the season, everything seemed so amicable. There wasn't any disconnection between the two. What Jimmy said is what the 49ers are saying, and then he gets sustained some injuries. I think, especially after that Tennessee Titan game, it really seemed like the communication between Garoppolo and the team, I don't want to say deteriorated, but they were sending different messages to the media, and that was very clear from that point out. But we're going to circle back to that, Jack, because I want to ask you, and I promise this is not targeted at you, nor was this my idea or intention when I woke up this morning. It's just something that I've been thinking a lot about. Will the 49ers cut Jimmy Garoppolo? It's the question I've been asking myself all day. And we talked a little beforehand. And I was kind of saying, earlier in the day, I felt a lot stronger about this. And I think the injury slightly complicates that because of the $7.5 million injury guarantee that the team has on him, no matter what. So with this situation playing out, I think the reason I immediately go to will they cut him is that March 16th, this is our new league year, right? The 49ers are not underneath the cap right now. They're $4 million over. And, even if they were $1 million into the cap, if they were fine in terms of cap space going into new league year is also the start of free agency. And they have about 30 or so on free agents. They only have about 30 players even signed to their roster right now. Do you think that there's any possibility that the 49ers end up just having to cut Jimmy Garoppolo? Because the way I see it, Jack, is that I think teams will offer picks right now. They'll certainly put in some offers for Jimmy Garoppolo, but I think for any team that has the intention of acquiring Jimmy Garoppolo, in their best interest to get this done as soon as possible, because they probably want to explore other options before they decide that Jimmy Garoppolo is the guy for them.
Yeah, no, I think there's definitely a possibility that he gets cut. I don't know how likely I would say that is. I would say maybe 50-50.
Yeah.
Um, I think, the 49ers can get under the cap. They just need to be under the cap by the 16th, and they can do that pretty easily uh, with a restructuring of Eric Armstead or Jimmy Ward or a number of different ways. They can get themselves under the number so that they can go out and negotiate and at least be under the number and be compliant, and then they'll work from there. So I wouldn't expect him to go onto the 16th and be, 10 or $15 million under the cap with Garoppolo on the roster, if that's what ends up happening. But they could, I think there is still interest in Garoppolo. Lynch said that today, so take that for what it's worth. With the other information that he said there on Garoppolo, he said that there are teams talking to him, and I think what we're going to find out, I just don't think there's going to be a team that's going to give the 49ers anything big for Garoppolo, at least not in 2022. I've said all along that I feel like the deal for Garoppolo is going to be more geared around 2023 if you're a team that's trying to acquire him, because you want to make sure that you get the goods before you pay big money. So I could see them giving up maybe a mid-round pick and a higher pick next year, depending on how well he plays, and could be nothing in 2023. Just something along those lines. It's some kind of a contingent type of a pick. And the other thing to think about here too is the injury. And if there really is this disconnect between Garoppolo and the team, it could be Garoppolo and his group saying, we're going to make sure you send me where you want me to go, where I want to go.
And I think that's a big part of this, Jack. It really feels like the thing that's been changing lately, because not to say that Jimmy Garoppolo put off this surgery, but the timing of all of this is definitely suspect. If it's not intentional, there's something a little fishy going on, because the way everything's working right now, a team bringing in Jimmy Garoppolo, they're not going to be able to have him for what is it, at least OTAs, maybe even training camp. They won't have him until after July 4th. I think that's the date that Adam Schefter or Ian Rappaport had been discussing with the timeline of the injury. So, we touched on it earlier. I don't necessarily think that impacts his value that drastically. I think what it impacts more than anything is that $7.5 million injury guarantee, because if the team does get to a point where they have to cut him, that is going to be a significant loss. And Jack, I can already see it now, and I started discussing this on Twitter, that in my mind, if they are going to cut Jimmy Garoppolo, which I think it's somewhat likely, you put it at 50-50 earlier, I would say maybe even a little above that, but that's probably right what we're talking about right now. The team will spin it as, hey, we could have got a 5th round pick for Jimmy Garoppolo. We could have got in it from this team, but ultimately, in our heart of hearts, we decided it was best for Jimmy Garoppolo to choose the team he goes to. He's such a big part of our family. He was such a big part of uplifting this franchise. We didn't want to do him wrong and just get the most out of him and send him to a franchise where he wouldn't want to be. I can see it right now, Jack.
No, I could see the 49ers doing that. That would make total sense when it comes to the spin. On the injury deal, the $7.5 million, that's actually offset. There's actually offset language around that. So
Okay.
If they do cut him, that would take, instead of having $25.5 million, they would only save $18 million until he signs with another team. And then as long as he signs for $7.5 million or more, they get their money back. And
Okay.
it makes them whole. But
that's relatively good news, all things considered.
Yeah. So I'm not sure how it works out. I'm not sure if they get that full money back this season or if it goes to next year. Even if it falls into next year, you can kind of work around that. If you're going to get an extra $7.5 million next year, when you're doing a deal with one of your free agents, you just give them, you give them more money up front or however, so that next year's number is bumped up a little bit to account for that. You know what I'm saying?
For sure.
That makes, yeah. So they're just trying to he's just trying to get to where he wants to go. I think this is the fact that this injury occurred, whenever their last game was the 30th of January, February 1st is when he said they were looking at their options. It's a month later now. The fact that it took a month to get to this point, I don't think that it's just by coincidence that the news breaks at the beginning of the combine when everybody's together, and that's when the action starts happening in the NFL. I think this is Don Yee and his representation um, playing hardball with the 49ers, and I just don't feel like they're really happy with the way that this thing's played out.
No, and nor should they be. I mean, really, because I think all along, while Jimmy Garoppolo has been the consummate pro, the 49ers have not done him any favors, really, in terms of everything that they've done on their end. So it does feel like Don Yee saying to the 49ers that, hey, we're not just going to send us wherever you send us, right? Right. We want Jimmy to be in the best situation possible. And it does feel like, well, maybe the 49ers could have got like we've been discussing about a mid-round, let's just say a fourth round pick for him. If it's a team Don Yee or Jimmy Garoppolo and their team was unhappy with, it certainly doesn't hurt their cause to put out this news right now. In fact, it probably helps them because now they can, ultimately it lets them push things the way they want to push them, right? But not go over the edge and not do anything just out of the blue. But for the franchise moving forward with this Garoppolo situation, do you think there's a hard deadline for them where, I know we discussed it earlier that, they can get underneath that cap without moving Garoppolo for March 16th, but also that first wave of free agency, you just want to be a part of that if you're the 49ers, especially with all the players that they're going to be having to bring back. I think 28 total free agents is the exact number. I believe 7 of those are restricted / exclusive rights guys. So 21 unrestricted guys. I mean, that is just, it's huge for the 49ers. I think it's why they have so many draft picks this year, but also why this cap number and this March 16th date is so important for them.
The only thing I'll say on that question is I think the 49ers are in a wait and see approach with a lot of their unrestricted free agents. I think that's pretty much a situation for them where it's like, we're going to let you go out and test the waters because we have our number. And if this is kind of where we are, you go out and find out if you can get more, and if you can get more, then go ahead and take it. But we'd love to have you back if you can't find it. I think that's kind of where the 49ers are with a lot of their unrestricted guys. When you look at their list of exclusive rights and restricted compared to the unrestricted, it just seems like there's more of their core players are in that unrestricted, or that, the restricted and the exclusive and restricted group than in the unrestricted. So I think we'll see the 49ers really focusing on those, getting those guys back in, because they can bring all of them back into the fold at a pretty low rate. It's a matter of the other guys that they'll be working around.
Right, and we're talking about for the restricted / exclusive rights guys. It's people like Juwan Jennings, I believe JaMychal Hasty, Kevin Givens are really the 3 big names I can think of off the top of my head for that list.
Azeez Al-Shaair.
That's another one.
He's a restricted free agent, I believe.
Right.
And then Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles is an exclusive rights free agent. So both of their linebackers outside of Warner. Because then you get into the unrestricted, then that's where you have like Marcel Harris and some of these other guys.
Right. And that's a great point, is that I think for all those restricted exclusive rights guys, they're guys the 49ers want back and have been a part of this team in the plan of this team for a long time. So really, they're going to be losing potentially, let's say, with the unrestricted guys, a few quality starters, your K'Wan Williams, your Jaquiski Tarts, your DJ Jones, guys like that. But like you mentioned, they also have the ability to bring back your Juwan Jennings, your Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles, Azeez Al-Shaair, and the timeline is a little different for those players where you don't have to get that done right away. So that does absolutely play into the 49ers' favor. I guess my one last question with the Jimmy Garoppolo topic is that with the draft approaching and with all the other potential quarterbacks who could be traded that have been discussed this offseason, how much do you feel like that necessarily affects Garoppolo's value? Because I could see, some teams saying to themselves, hey, we want to wait and see what happens with the Rodgers, the Wilsons, Deshaun Watson even. But ultimately, I don't know if that really changes Garoppolo's value as much as it changes the timeline.
I don't know if it changes his value. I think his value is still going to be roughly about the same. Maybe if the injury wasn't here, I would say it probably bumps him up a little bit in some cases because of it's just supply and demand, right? But it doesn't sound like it. Sure, from everything I'm seeing, it seems like all these quarterbacks are going to be staying put, and Garoppolo is really the only one out on the market who's a veteran that's had any type of success. And so, he would make a ton of sense to me in Washington.
Oh
When
yeah.
you sit back and really think about that one, he makes sense to me in Pittsburgh as well. He makes sense for me also in Indianapolis. I think those are the three main locations that I see him going to. If you look at Washington in 2021 when they went to the playoffs, their team was about the same as they were that year as they were in 2020, or excuse me, 2020 when they went to the playoffs. That team was about the same as they were in 2021. The difference was at the quarterback position because you just had a veteran quarterback that knew how to win games for you in Alex Smith, and that's kind of what Jimmy Garoppolo I think brings. They have a solid running game and a solid defense, and I think he kind of knows how to play around that.
And I also think, Jack, there's a certain level of desperation that a team has to be under where they're trying to acquire Garoppolo, because for most teams like a Pittsburgh, which I think it's less likely versus a Carolina or a Washington even, is that if a team is in a Ron Rivera position or a Matt Rule position where they need to win now to stay with the franchise they need to produce a playoff season to stay in the NFL, I think a lot of teams in that position will be interested in Jimmy Garoppolo because, like you mentioned, they'll just strike out on the other quarterbacks that might be higher on their priority list. But I do disagree in that a team like the Steelers or even a team like, I'm trying to think of other teams that people have been out there, the Saints, right?
Mm-hmm.
Teams like that are more built for the long term, or at least their coaches or organizations have a longer leash to where they don't need that quick fix this season. They might be more interested in drafting that guy in the first round, letting him develop as he plays, or even signing a free agent who that's kind of the thing that I've always questioned with teams who are interested in Garoppolo. You could go out and sign Mitchell Trubisky, Jameis Winston for a third of the price, maybe around there, and you don't have to give up an asset to do it. So I think that's one of the roadblocks I look at. Although I do think because of the lack of quarterbacks who will be traded, there's going to be a team who is sitting there who doesn't have or who isn't happy with their situation, who wants a different quarterback, and they have to make a decision at some point, and they're going to have to get Garoppolo. And that's why I think for a lot of teams, they're not going to want to get this done by that March 16th date, right? But for the 49ers, they're probably, obviously, they're more incentivized to get that done by then.
I think the thing that makes a team like Washington, makes Garoppolo attractive to a team like Washington, especially now we got to factor in the shoulder and the fact that he's not going to be throwing until about a month before training camp starts. So he's not going to be able to throw throughout OTAs and mini camps and any of those things. He will be able to be there, but he won't be able to participate. It would be the fact that I think you need to they need to be in position where they have a quarterback that they feel somewhat comfortable in the meantime. So for me, that's why Washington makes sense.
That makes sense.
It's also why I would throw in New Orleans, quite frankly, is because they do have a quarterback there in Taysom Hill, who they're comfortable with. They might just go ahead and bring back Jameis Winston, right? Or who knows what happens with Winston. But that's kind of the. I don't think that a team's going to be in the Jimmy Garoppolo market if they don't have somebody that can kind of carry the water for him until training camp starts and maybe beyond if he's struggling with the injury longer.
Well, and that's a great point. Even why, like a team like the Commanders, obviously they have Heineke in place, right? That's someone who he's not their ideal quarterback, but he's a quarterback that they can play, that he can start games for them if need be. But like you said, really, it's more functioning throughout training camp, mini camp, up until they get to those August camp dates and all of that. But we've been touching on Jimmy Garoppolo for a long time. I feel like we have this topic well covered. I do want to transition, though, to the next quarterback potentially of the 49ers. Obviously, John Lynch today was just raving about Trey Lance. Not that he hasn't raved about him before, but it does seem like it's been quite a while since Lynch has talked about Lance in this kind of light. So what kind of comments did you really hang on to from what John Lynch said about Lance? And then how do you think the communication is around how people feel about Lance? They're obviously bringing in a revamped coaching staff on the offensive side of the ball. There's going to be a lot of new people involved in terms of that. So what do you just make of all of this today with Trey Lance?
No, I think that what Lynch said today is on par with what he's felt about Trey Lance all along. If we're to believe that, there was some rumors and discussions around the fact that maybe Lynch forced Lance on Shanahan a little bit, and who knows if that's reality or not, because we don't know, because we're not in the room. But it would make sense if this is the kind of thing that makes that talk make sense, right? Because Lynch is very effusive in his praise of Lance, and he was this way back in training camp right before the Kansas City Chiefs game, when he said that Lance was pushing Garoppolo. So, I don't know if there was any one thing that he said today that really made me kind of hang on it or anything like that. But I definitely, the fact that, he's still on there, he's the guy that we wanted, or he's still, he's everything that we thought of and more. I think the and more part should get people excited. And I feel like he's going to be fine. You saw the growth from from preseason to week 5, and then really from week 5 to week 17. That's where you saw the biggest jump. And so I'm excited to see what happens with the Trey Lance era starting next year. Good or bad, it's going to be a lot of fun to cover.
Oh, I think it's going to be a fascinating situation. I mean, obviously, everyone in the national media seems enamored with it as well. And it was funny, even today, John Lynch mentioned the clips that came out of practice that got leaked by Javi. I mean, shout out Javi, man. I mean, you are just blowing up in all kinds of ways right now, I'm sure. But it's just funny that it does seem like the Niners are very aware of the way people talk about Trey Lance, the discussion around him, and the want from the fan base to see more and understand more about what this is going to be looking like next season.
Yeah, I think the clips that Javi put out were fantastic, especially for folks that weren't at practice. And when I say at practice, I'm talking about practice during training camp, because we saw him making those types of plays, especially in the beginning. That's why when you hear John Lynch, before the first preseason game, talking about how Lance is pushing Garoppolo, right? And you heard Matt Mayoko talking positively about Trey Lance and, the things that he was bringing. You heard Grant Cohn talking about, how he should start. And I was right there with Grant on the starting piece, really up until the game started, and not so much a little bit against Kansas City, but really more that second week when when they were down against the Chargers, and you had him playing against the ones in camp, and it didn't seem like it was going as good from the reports that I was hearing, because I wasn't down there. And then watching the game against the Chargers, you didn't really see him playing well against the starters until the backups that kind of rolled in, and then he kind of took over. But I feel like that the kid's gone through a lot in terms of growth. I feel like the route that they took with him was to his benefit, and he was able to go get all those growing pains out. He was able to experience pretty much everything other than a Super Bowl that you would experience in an NFL season. And I think it's going to pay off for the 49ers in 2022. I really do.
And I think for, a lot of these kids who are coming into the NFL, especially Trey Lance, right? These are kids who haven't seen a team that they've been on lose a lot. Most of the teams that are on in high school, college, for Trey Lance's example, they go very far. They make a lot of noise. So I think for him, like you mentioned, to be on this team this season, to experience all the things that the team experienced, the ups and downs, the ebbs and the flows of the season, seeing how Jimmy Garoppolo handled it, it should be to his benefit for sure. And it's still funny to me, Jack. I mean, Trey Lance is younger than I am, and he would be the youngest quarterback in this draft class right now if he was in it. I mean, really, this is people say he's green. He's just young. I mean, this is just a really young dude. So I think for as many as the people will see this draft in particular, who are 5th-year guys, 6th-year guys because of the extra year of COVID, there were a lot of guys coming out last year who didn't get that extra year under their belt, or were a lot younger who would have been in this next draft class. So it's just interesting how that all plays out. And I will say, I think all things considered, kind of looking back on the trade, as we look at it now for its face value, the 49ers made the absolute right decision in trading up for Trey Lance. They did give up lots of assets to do so, but when you're looking at the actual point chart of how everything's starting to work out now, the 49ers make the playoffs next season. It really seems like, I don't want to say they necessarily fleeced the Dolphins, but they did not give up too much for the type of quarterback they're trading for.
No, 100%. And that's I think the we've heard a lot of talk about Lance, and if Lance had stayed in school and just not come out when he did, that he'd be the number one pick in the draft. I mean, you could say that about all the guys that were
Sure.
underclassmen last year, because all the top 5 guys that came out, I think, were pretty much underclassmen. But he definitely would have been a top 2 or 3. And, the 49ers gave up a lot to get him, but that pick, the first pick that they gave up, they used on him. The second pick is now the 29th pick in the draft. If they go out and get to the deep end of the playoffs next year with Lance again, you're looking at another late one. So it really worked out well for the 49ers. There was definitely a lot of foresight. I think that was actually something that John Lynch talked about today as well, was kind of getting ahead of it, because they didn't, their advanced scouting was that the class wasn't going to be very good in terms of quarterbacks. So I think they did a really good move there. And even though he didn't start in 2021, I just feel like it was everything they did with Lance, I think was the right move, and I think it's going to pay off starting 2022.
And I totally agree with that. I want to go over to the comments though here for a sec. I see Swan Song in there. I think this is a great point. If the 49ers had tried to acquire Trey Lance in this draft, if he was the guy that we all thought he would be going into this class, they would have no chance at acquiring him right now. Almost no chance, unless they wanted to pull off the type of trade they tried to pull off last year. And even then, might be harder, because he would be the only quarterback of that caliber in this class. So it's really a situation, like you mentioned, Jack, where the 49ers were just so smart to get out ahead of this and anticipate this. And I think for as many people that were like, oh my God, like what's happening when they made that trade, looking back on it now, it was absolutely the right decision. And and I agree. E. Kim, this is a great point. Well, the best part of the Lance trade so far is that Miami is getting the 29th overall pick this year. If that pick was pick 15 or pick 14 or somewhere in the range of where they were last season, it'd be a much different discussion. But the fact is that in terms of the actual value of how this is playing out, it's just absolutely playing into the 49ers' favor. It's something you have to be really optimistic about as a fan. If you can take one really good positive away so far, even though we haven't experienced Lance much, but do want to get back to this John Lynch press conference.
Can I throw one more thing out there really quick before we do that?
Yeah.
Just because we're talking about this through, and we're talking about that pick of Lance and everything that kind of went along with that. Just one last shot at Jimmy Garoppolo. And this isn't even a shot at him, it's just a discussion of Jimmy Garoppolo, is whether you feel like he was a good quarterback or not. Whatever you feel about Jimmy Garoppolo, all 49ers fans need to be really appreciative of what they got out of him during the 5 years that he was here, because of this. The 2 seasons that he was fully healthy in 2019 and 2021, they got to a Super Bowl and they got to an NFC Championship game with him. The 2 seasons that he wasn't healthy, he got them Nick Bosa and Trey Lance. So for, when this team goes forward and Jimmy Garoppolo is long gone, there's going to be some positives to that whole Jimmy Garoppolo thing. Even if they don't get a pick for him, they just have to let him go. Yeah. They got Trey Lance and Nick Bosa because of Jimmy Garoppolo.
That's an amazing point, Jack. That is a great point, really, because for as much as criticism as Jimmy Garoppolo gets and the 49ers get from the Jimmy Garoppolo experience, he certainly has afforded them the ability to go get high-end talent. So it's something you definitely have to acknowledge with this whole Jimmy Garoppolo situation. It's something I didn't really quite think about until now, Jack. But that is a great point. It's really, really funny.
Yeah, and it's not even ripping. I mean, you don't ever want a player to get hurt or anything. But the fact that Jimmy Garoppolo was around, he was a really good quarterback when he was healthy, and the team struggled really bad when he wasn't. And so those injuries just all played out. It just all played right in 49ers' hands.
Well, and the injuries occurred at the right time, really, because if he had gotten injured like 15 games into the 2018 season, and now their pick is somewhere in the teens, and they don't get to draft Nick Bosa, it not only changes the defense for the 49ers moving forward, but then you want to talk about their second round pick. They probably wouldn't have been able to get Deebo Samuel at the top of the second round. So Jimmy Garoppolo, responsible for Bosa and Deebo. It's a great point, Jack.
Oh yeah, I forgot it. Oh shoot, thank you. I'm writing that one down because I forgot about Deebo, because they wouldn't have got Deebo if they weren't so high. Thank you. Now I got another name I got to write down. So we got Nick Bosa, Deebo Samuel, and Trey Lance.
Well,
Nice.
and you don't have to talk about the third pick of that draft. You know, you can just gloss over that
Yeah.
one.
Hey, but then they also got Mitch Wisnowski too. So hey, I'm definitely putting him at the top of the list. They got Mitch Wisnowski. Thank you, Jimmy.
If I could go back in time and change anything, it would be Mitch Wisnowski. Honest to God, like, oh man, oh God.
Yeah,
Anyways, we don't have
that's
to
all right.
talk about
Let's
punters.
move on to where we were
Yeah,
going
you're
before
giving me
I went off the rails.
PTSD, like bad Mitch Wisnowski, like non kickback kind of PTSD right now. But I do want to talk more about this John Lynch press conference because John Lynch was talking a lot today, and there's a lot of news really
It was.
going on. Obviously, the 49ers offensive line, I think for me, is the most underrated part about this offseason in terms of, going one way or the other can really affect their ability to put the right team around Trey Lance and give him the opportunity to be successful like Jimmy Garoppolo has. Now, the first big news is that Mike McGlinchey, his rehab seems to be going well, according to John Lynch. He made it sound like everything that they were expecting out of McGlinchey, he's on track for, and that they don't have any reservations so far about the process. And the expectation is that once he is fully healthy, they expect him to be back. They don't expect him to be hampered by the injury necessarily. But I guess the one thing we didn't quite get from this whole discussion today, Jack, was we didn't get a timeline exactly for this McGlinchey situation. But what do you make about the comments that Lynch made about McGlinchey today?
Well, he didn't really say a whole lot about it, but in terms of, I mean, he was kind of, he's pretty straight across the board, but he did say that he's having success. He's doing well with his rehab. So that's nice. If he's, this torn quad tendon, that's a tough deal for tackles usually to come back from. So if they're able to get him to kind of come along and have this rehab go out well, McGlinchey is a huge piece of this offensive line that they need to figure out, because without it, I think he affects their draft strategy and their free agent strategy and kind of everything. Even though they have a number of guys in house, I think McGlinchey's kind of a linchpin to how they put that group together.
Well, I think he's a domino, really. Like you mentioned, if they have less clarity on him, then that affects their free agency, the draft, everything they're going to do this offseason. And really for me, not that I didn't worry about the tackle positions, but moving forward, I'm most concerned about those three interior spots because obviously Lake and Tomlinson is a big part of this discussion, and that hinges on whether or not they bring him back. But they could have three brand new starters in each of those guard and center spots for next season. So not that I wasn't concerned with Mike McGlinchey, but I think it's something a lot of people just had forgotten about because Tom Compton did come in and he wasn't great, but he was good enough to where it wasn't such a huge drop off for the 49ers where it affected their ability to move on in the playoffs and be successful in that sense. Obviously, McGlinchey is better. And I even think, Jack, that I felt like in the early part of the season before the injury for McGlinchey, I felt he was improving some. I felt like his pass protection was getting better. In fact, I think his pressure numbers were about as good as any season for him through the first half. So for McGlinchey moving forward, I guess my last question to you for him would be, how much do you worry about him coming off this injury right away? Because obviously the way Lynch was talking about it, he says, he wants him to be fully comfortable, healthy, no setbacks, nothing to where he has any reservation in his mind about it. But with that kind of injury, like you mentioned, it's very concerning. And we don't know the exact severity, but still, no matter what, that quad is hugely concerning.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a concern. The 49ers have a group of offensive linemen that I think can kind of fill in the gaps if they need to. If their plan is to stick with McGlinchey and they're not going to use any kind of draft capital or anything on a tackle, they have Moore who played a little bit over there. They have Colton McKivitz who could play right tackle if they need to. Justin School should be healthy, I believe, going into next year.
Tom Compton, baby.
They could always bring back Tom Compton as well. I mean, there's guys that they could fill in over there if they want to kind of go this McGlinchey route. I think they're okay there. The other name that you have on the screen, I think, is the bigger concern is Alex Mack, because I don't know if they have a guy that's a backup, another center on their team that they would want to put in there. I don't know if they want to move Daniel Brunskill to center.
I think the only guy they even have was that Jake Brindle, was it?
Yeah, Jake Brendel, and I think he's an unrestricted free agent.
Yeah,
I
he is.
think. So I don't know if they want to bring Brendel back, or if they want to try to work something out where maybe they go back to the whole Brunskill at center thing and use Moore and or a couple other guys at guard. It's going to be something kind of fascinating to watch how they put that offensive line together, because they definitely need to make some moves there. And centers, I would not be upset if they took a center in the second round, and even if he wasn't going to start.
No, I totally agree with that. I think, to me, the top of the priority list, no matter if Alex Mack retires or not this offseason, and that's the one piece of news that we did get today, is that it seems likely he won't retire, but there's still no confirmation on that exactly. That with the center position, they even if Alex Mack doesn't retire this offseason, let's say he's back, they're going to need to or find that replacement next offseason if they don't find it this offseason. So getting ahead of it now, it feels similar to how they went about the whole Lake and Tomlinson issue, where they drafted Aaron Banks with the idea that, hey, if Lake and Tomlinson walks, we have someone who we're comfortable with that guy in waiting. So I think for the center position moving forward, it's really one of the more concerning ones. I think Jack is actually frozen. Oh, no, not frozen. Sorry. Yeah, you're frozen there for a second, but
yeah, probably
with the whole center position, I would love them to draft someone, Jack. I totally agree with you, but I actually think there's a guy who I'm interested in free agency as well. If Alex Mack does return, his name, I believe, I want to get this right, is Evan Brown, because he was the Detroit Lions center. And if I'm getting the name wrong, excuse me, I'm bringing it up right now, but with him, he was on the Detroit Lions last season. Frank Ragnow went down, and the reason I say that the 49ers should be interested in him, Evan Brown, yeah, that's the name, is he played very well for Ragnow, and obviously Anthony Lynn was with the Detroit Lions last season, so Anthony Lynn would have the insight for a player like this. He's a 25-year-old guy. I think ideally, Jack, you would want to go and get that guy in the draft. I totally agree with you. But if they don't have someone they're comfortable with, there could be some options. I don't think there's many, but there aren't no options in terms of them for the center position or getting that guy in waiting.
No, there's guys. If they need to move on or do something around there are players that they can move on in free agency. And another one that's a free agent, I think he's going to be a free agent this year. Austin Blythe is another name, and he was somebody who I thought the 49ers might go after last year. He was injured all season though with I think it was Kansas City, right?
I believe so.
Yeah, and so it didn't work out with him there. But there's guys that there's guys that they can go after if they need to, and it'll be. But you're right. I think having Mack come back is just big from the standpoint. We've said it so many times. The center is your quarterback on that offensive line. You need that guy to be consistent, and they got that out of him. It was a little rough for him the first few weeks, but they definitely picked it up as the season went along.
Oh, absolutely. And like you said, it wasn't perfect at first in terms of that and those initial kind of first 6 to 8 weeks, but by the end of the season, Mack was one of the most integral parts of that offensive line, really. So it's going to be interesting how they assemble this offensive line moving forward, Jack. I could see it as the biggest position in flux in terms of they could bring in, 60% of their offensive line could be new starters next season, just possibly. But in the same sense, it does feel like they're at least going to have either Lakin or Mack back, if not potentially both, right? I guess, what do you feel about the Lakin Tomlinson situation before we move on to the next topic? Do you feel like he will re-sign with the team, or do you feel like it's kind of a DJ Jones situation where they have a limit, and if they can get him at the number they want, they will, but they're not going to go past that number?
Yeah, I think that's the situation with Lake and Tomlinson as well. Is that I don't see that. I don't know if they're going to want to spend more than $10 million a year on a guard if they value that position, because they're all about value in a lot of their stuff, right?
Oh, yeah.
So like that's one of the reasons they moved on was from DeForest Buckner's. They had to have, they had to pick between him or Armstead. Armstead played a little bit of inside and outside, so they could see giving him 17 instead of 19 to Buckner, and because of the value, the way they value the position. So I don't know if they value that guard and center position quite as much as they do the tackles.
No, I totally agree with that. I think they just don't have that that high value for that position. Like they do value the tackle position. Obviously, they've invested a lot in it over this time. But I do want to move on to some more of John Lynch's comments. One player he specifically mentioned in bringing back was Jason Verrett. Jason Verrett, obviously, kind of an interesting situation. Tore his ACL that first game against the Detroit Lions. They played the entire season, obviously, beyond then without him. But when he was on the team in 2020, I mean, that is the best corner play the 49ers have had in my memory, really, watching the team recently. So it's kind of a unique situation with Verrett. He's had so many injuries in his career, and you can't rely on him in that way. But if he were to come back to the 49ers, what would you make of that situation?
This is one of those situations, one of those players where I wouldn't have been all that excited about it. I'm still not getting like really excited about it, but I could see bringing him in and having him be a death piece. I'd be honest with you, I'd probably be more happy with him doing it now than I was last year because of his injury history. I wasn't, the 49ers went into the season with Jason Verrett and a bunch of rookies who you didn't know anything about. At least now you know that Ambry Thomas can kind of hold his own.
Right.
And so if Jason Verrett isn't able to be healthy or be the guy, you know that you have Emmanuel Moseley and and Ambry Thomas to hold it down if Verrett can't stay healthy. So, if you can bring him back on a cheaper deal because of the injury history and so on, bring him back, get more competition in the room. That's where guys like Verrett and Mostert make sense, is if you can bring them back on deals where they're basically brought in to compete, and if everything stays right, you're set to go as long as you have the room set up around them.
I agree with you on that front, that I think for the 49ers, if they can get them on a non-guaranteed deal and say that, hey, you're going to compete through training camp, and if you make the team and we feel you're healthy, great. If not, there's just no guarantees that we're going to hang on to you through camp. But also, Jack, can I be honest? I don't want them to bring back Jason Verrett, and it's because I think at that position, they're going to have Emmanuel Moseley signed. They're going to have Ambry Thomas. They'll have Diamador Lenore. I assume they'll bring Dante Johnson back because to me, that's the number one guy in terms of the cornerback free agents I want to bring back, and that's not even being sarcastic.
I know that's funny when you think about it.
It's funny because the dialogue and discussion a year ago, you would have been crazy if you're talking about Dante Johnson over Jason Verrett. But for me, you have those three guys already. Dante Johnson is the last guy in the room. I think they need a serious $4 to $5 million corner who can come in and start games for them if need be. If they're not going to go out and get Stephon Gilmore or draft a corner in the second or third round, they need to get a Kyle Fuller type, of Steven Nelson, someone who can come in a pinch to where you don't have to sign Josh Norman off the street or sign Drake Kirkpatrick or go through the bargain bin. I would want to get ahead of that issue now, and then maybe even draft someone, and then that fills out your room of 6 corners for me. So the way I see it, Jack, is they could bring back Jason Verrett, and I know people won't complain if they do, but at the same time, I want them to upgrade the room, because that's one room that I really worry about in terms of depth next season. I have confidence if we know Ambry Thomas, if we know Emmanuel Moseley are going to be healthy for 100% of the year. But we just don't know that, Jack. And like we've seen with the recent history of the 49ers secondary, I mean, all 5 of the starting defensive backs in their backfield last season had significant injury history at the beginning of the year. So I just don't want them going into another season where, hey, if Emmanuel Moseley goes down, Jason Verrett's the guy now. Look, Jason Verrett would be awesome if he was healthy, if you can guarantee all this. But for the 49ers, they need to find a way to not be in a position where they lose because of the corner spot. And they're in tough game situations like they were against Indianapolis this year. Obviously, go back to 2020, there were some worse situations, or even 19 and beyond then with the Brian Allen Dolphins game and things like that. But I don't want them to be having to go on the waiver wire and saying, hey, we couldn't rely on Jason Verrett. Now we have to go and pick up whomever. I just think for the 49ers, they need quality depth at that corner spot more than they need to bring back Jason Verrett.
No, I see what you're saying. If the 49ers are going to go and bring like the free agency route to bring in somebody from outside the team, I don't think they're going to spend a lot on many guys, but DJ Reed, Cam mentions him over here, and I put him in my article last week as
Totally
far as
agree.
kind of a top end, cornerback to go after, because I think he's going to be somewhat expensive. But DJ Reed makes a ton of sense if the Flyers could get him from Seattle, because he's a very good outside corner that is actually very good on the side opposite of Emmanuel Mosley, because Emmanuel Mosley always plays on the right side of the defense, uh, and he's at his best when he plays on the left. And speaking of DJ Reed, and then also with Reed, you can slide him down into the slot, so he kind of kills two birds with one stone.
Absolutely.
Imagine having DJ Reed be your starter. He steps inside, and then Embry Thomas comes off the bench and fills in. It makes a lot of sense. It's very similar to what the Flyers did in 2011 through 2013 when they were really good under Harbaugh.
Yeah, and I think, the thing with bringing back Jason Verrett, to kind of circle this back, is that if they do bring in DJ Reed, if they do bring in a Steven Nelson type, you know what, go for it. Bring back Jason Verrett, because you're not really relying on him in a pinch where he's that first guy, off the bench if one of those guys goes down. But they need to have a solution at depth for corner. They need to bring in a guy, like you said, with DJ Reed, who can also play multiple positions. That's why, to me, ideally, I'd love to sign Stephon Gilmore. He's my dream signing in the offseason. If I could bring anyone to the 49ers, it would be him, because of how good he is, obviously, but because of the defensive versatility he presents, there's not many guys who can play at that level that he can, and then play inside out the way he's been able to do in the NFL for the last few seasons. Obviously, he's getting older, but I guess I'm not totally against this Chase and Red idea. It's more just, you got to come up with better solutions to the ancillary spots at corner if you're going to bring back Jason Verrett. He can't be the guy you're relying on, the break glass if emergency. It can't be Jason Verrett, because he's not that reliable.
because he's the guy that usually have the break glass to replace. I get
right. Right. Oh my gosh. Yeah. No, it's yeah, and I saw this. This is a great point. Kel's Chronicles, I think he made it on Grant's channel, or someone else made it on there, that last 27 years of Super Bowl winners, they've all had a Pro Bowl player in their secondary. You know what I would say to that is that Jimmy Ward is definitely worthy of being a Pro Bowler. So,
but he hasn't been. He hasn't been.
No, and that's totally unfair to him, man. If Alex Mack is getting Pro Bowls, if Laken Tomlinson is, Jimmy Ward should be getting Pro Bowls as well.
Yeah.
And I do want to move on to some of John Lynch's other comments, that more specifically on another player, DJ Jones. I mean, today, really, he was, not that Lynch holds back, but he was willing to talk about a lot today with the DJ Jones situation. He said that the 49ers would obviously love to be able to bring back DJ Jones, but the way he was talking about it, he thinks that DJ Jones has priced himself out from the 49ers. Now, Jack, obviously the Javon Kinlaw situation kind of changes probably how the team thinks about the defensive line this offseason. But with DJ Jones, it doesn't seem like they're going to bring him back. What do you think the impact is if they do let him walk in free agency?
I agree. I do think that this, that it is going to be challenging for them to bring Jones back, because Jones had a fairly strong year. DJ is a guy who, Jones is somebody who we thought was going to walk last year that came back to the 49ers. And, is that going to be something that's going to happen 2 years in a row? Maybe not. The one other piece to this, though, is that he only played 51% of the defensive snaps. So that's the other piece to this is he's a very good player. Is he worth overspending on? No. This is another guy. They have their number. If he can get 5 or more, he's gonna be gone. If somebody's gonna be paying them that much, just because the snaps aren't there for him. And the defensive line is the one spot on the 49ers where I don't have a problem with them, because like bring in somebody who we don't know about, because they have shown the ability to bring in guys and turn people that you don't think are very good into very good players. We saw that this year with the Arden Key, for example.
Yeah, and I think that's why I'm so adverse, really, to the 49ers trying to spend money on these types of guys. We saw it with Kerry Hyder last season. Obviously, I think DJ Jones is a better player than Kerry Hyder for what he does, but the 49ers are able to go and get these these unwanted free agents, these guys that every other team has said no to, these guys who are, former first, second, third round picks, teams just give up on, they can take them and turn them into something. And when you have a coach like Chris Kocurek, I just don't understand why they make these moves that they do, Jack, where they do draft Javon Kinlaw as a defensive interior lineman with such a high pick, when they can go and draft DJ Jones, right? They've proven they can do that almost every single year. So moving forward with the defensive line, I probably wouldn't want to keep DJ Jones under most circumstances, even if he's close to that number the 49ers want, because ultimately they can take that 5th round pick. They could take that 6th round pick. They can go in free agency and find the guy that no one else wants, and they can make him out of something. And to me, beyond the core guys they have, they should just be getting those bargain bin free agents every single season and making the most out of them, because they shouldn't be spending a lot at a position where, they can just produce these guys at a rate where other teams can't. And it's in my opinion that they don't shift enough of the resources that they put in their defensive line to other spots where they don't have the coaching that can make up for the lack of talent.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I'm looking forward to seeing what they do here. I'd love to see Jones back, but I just don't see it really being in the cards unless somebody just doesn't pay, step up for him. It might be that situation because the cap's going up, but it's not going up this year. It's going to be next year that the cap really explodes. So they might get lucky. They might have some guys coming back to them.
It might be another 1-year deal for DJ Jones specifically, a guy who's still young, right? And if he has another good season, if he plays more snaps, like you mentioned, I'm sure teams are looking at that. He only played 50% of the snaps. If he goes for the 49ers next season, steps in, plays 50 to 60% of the snaps, has a similar season, and the cap explodes the way we think it does, it obviously be in his interest to cash in then rather than now. So I think you're right. They might get lucky, but it also does seem like John Lynch and the team is very comfortable with just moving on from this situation in general. And it does seem like they have a certain level of confidence in the defensive line where, I think every single year we expect them to take that defensive lineman with the first pick, right? But they've kind of gotten to the point where they've built up enough talent that well, let's talk about that for a second, Jack. It'd be freaking nuts. I'm sorry if they took an edge guy or a defensive interior guy with that 61st overall pick. And I understand best player available. You want to do all that sort of stuff, but like, come on, for what we're looking at with this team, on the edge, Nick Bosa, Armstead, right? He's inside, outside. Charles Omenihu, Jordan Willis. They have all these guys. They don't need to go and spend that 2nd round pick on an edge player. And I just feel like they are, Jack. In my core, I can just see right now, edge 61st overall for the 49ers.
Or a defensive tackle at 61, right?
Yeah, totally. I would not put it past. Who's the UConn defensive lineman who's getting a lot of buzz earlier? Hey, just go for any guy who says defensive interior. If he fits that value, John Lynch, we know how they feel about the trenches. But I think it's going to be interesting to see how they construct this defensive line this season, especially with the Javon Kinlaw piece of it, because that to me will tell us more about how they feel about the rest of the situations and the value and everything. But it's, it's one of those positions that with the 49ers, you expect them to invest less, but no, they're going to invest even more this offseason.
That's right.
It'll be interesting to see. But Jack, I do want to do one more last topic with you. I want to talk about Trey Sermon, someone who I think I tweeted this about 2-3 weeks ago. I just forgot Trey Sermon existed. I think the 49ers did as well. Or the funny thing to me, Jack, is I have this running joke between, my brother and some of my friends who are aware of my 49ers fandom that Kyle Shanahan must just hate Trey Sermon or something, because it's a really strange situation that went on this season where he got the opportunity in that Seattle game. He comes in, he makes a little noise, and then from there on out, we didn't really see him much at all this season.
No, we really didn't. I think the number was 41. I think that's how many snaps or how many carries he got this year. I think he only had 41. I think he had a total of 44 touches on the season. So that's definitely an issue for Sermon. And Lynch talked about it today, about his him needing to kind of change his running style a little bit to be more effective in the NFL. Uh, and that's not anything new, because that's something I think it was Mike McDaniel who talked about that during during training camp, going back all the way to training camp, was Sermon having to be a little bit tighter to the holes and things like that. So uh, there definitely is a need for growth from Sermon, and I think that there is a role for him, and I think that if he can improve like they're hoping, I understand where their excitement for him comes.
Yeah, and I think they should be excited about the running back they spent a third round pick on last season, right? I mean, they invest for how much they invest in the running back position. This is, I won't say it's unusual because they've done it before, but they've certainly proven they can go and get Elijah Mitchells every single year, or Michael Hasties, or these kinds of players, to where they don't necessarily have to invest the capital. So he's someone that realistically they need to implement into their offense next season. I guess my one Trey Sermon question, or running back question in general, is when you look at this running back room, I think Elijah Mitchell, people kind of anticipate he might be that bell cow back next season, but I just don't quite see it that way, because he didn't prove he could be all that durable, that he could sustain that many carries throughout the season. I mean, people talk about all the injuries and ailments Jimmy Garoppolo was dealing with. I don't think anyone dealt with more last season than Elijah Mitchell on the team, maybe in terms of the collection of injuries that he had by the end of the year. So moving forward, Raheem Mostert, he's a free agent. They could obviously bring him back, but how do you think this room plays out? And then do you think they want to bring someone in, or if not bring someone, have Sermon be that guy to kind of offset that load that Elijah Mitchell has right now?
No, I'm with you. The Mitchell thing is he's a really good back, but the injury, when he gets a high number of carries, it seems to, a couple, he can do it for a game or two, and then it falls off. And so they need to have a guy like a Raheem Mostert is what they need, right? They need a guy like that. So if they can find an explosive back, whether it's Mostert or somebody else, I'm not sure where that player is going to come from. And then you throw in Mitchell and Sermon and Hasty, that's a really good foursome.
Absolutely.
But they need that explosive element, and I don't think that they want it to be Deebo Samuel, although he's an exceptional player. He has an injury history too, and I don't think they want to keep running that risk of having him run the ball between the tackles 4 or 5 times a game.
Yeah, and look, Jack, if the 49ers had all the cap space in the world this offseason, my number one target would be Cordarrelle Patterson, right? Because you want to talk about someone who fits what the 49ers are doing already. To me, what they're doing in these last few seasons, what Kyle's been doing, is mastering kind of positionless football, right? People talk about positionless basketball, where guys can play multiple spots, but you look at George Kittle, Kyle Juszczyk, Deebo Samuel. Even by the end of the season, I don't want to say Elijah Mitchell can play multiple spots, but I felt like he developed a lot as a receiver by the end of the year. We saw him a lot more involved in that receiving game. So ideally, man, I would love if they could bring in Cordarrelle Patterson or someone who has that ability. Obviously, not many people do, but to me, versatility and bringing in a back who can present something different from what the 49ers don't already have in-house, that to me would be the key with that position. You mentioned Raheem Mostert, obviously, who would provide that, but even if we're talking about the draft, they probably want to bring in someone who doesn't do what they already kind of have on their roster.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, the Patterson one makes sense because he was somebody that I liked last year that I felt would be that type of role was somebody I felt they should have went out and got. So Patterson would be one, and they just need that explosive. They need a back. They need an explosive back. They have the pounders. They need an explosive guy, and Jermichael Hasty is a nice little third down back, but he's not a guy that you want to run very much. But so you need to have, I think if they could get Mitchell to carry the ball 15, 16 times a game and then have a rotation of backs behind that, I think that's really what they would like to have.
Yeah, and I think that would be ideal. Even when you bring Deebo Samuel obviously into the fold, that only adds to that. So I'm right there with you. I think they can't rely. They know they can't keep giving Mitchell the amount of carries they were at that point in the season last year, where he was getting 27 in back-to-back games. What they need to figure out is that balance of this running back room, because I think, like you mentioned, I mean, they have all the players that you would potentially want in that room. they just got to do a better job of divvying out the carries so that they don't get Elijah Mitchell hurt the way they did last year. So it's going to be really interesting to see where they go about that. I think they could even draft someone. I like this kid out of Florida in particular, which is funny for me, right? But it'll be interesting to see how that all kind of plays out. Obviously, Raheem Mostert kind of feels like one of the bigger dominoes in terms of maybe a team could price him out. If the 49ers bring him back, he kind of affects how they go about the draft and the rest of free agency. But Trey Sermon, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, I just think, I just don't want to have an opinion one way or the other on him so far. I want to see how this all plays out. And, we'll certainly learn more about that, I think, throughout camp and throughout this early part of the season.
Yeah, totally agree with you on that one.
And I think that's actually going to do it for us today, guys. Just shout out to Jack Hammer, everyone. We just hit an hour, I see, on the live stream. You stayed with me throughout this whole time. Jack, thank you so much for coming on today. This is such a blast to do. And for everyone who isn't already, which, hey, if you're here, I don't know how you aren't, but make sure you go subscribe to Jack's channel. It's in the link down below. His Twitter is in the link down below. I know he's very, very pro Jimmy Garoppolo on his Twitter, but I won't hold that against him too much.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Hey, I gave you a good reason in this show to why you should be pro Jimmy Garoppolo yourself.
Of course. Hey, he gave us Deebo Samuel. He gave us Nick, but no, I mean, really excellent points. And next time Grant goes off on a Twitter rant about Jimmy Garoppolo, I know right where I'm going, and I know right where I hope you'll go, Jack. So everyone, thank you so much for sticking around. If you have, make sure to like and subscribe. Make sure you put the notifications on for the channel too. We will be live next week. Today was the last day of streaming for me. I'll be back again with Vinny on Monday. I will be back with Amin next week as well, and I'll have some guests lined up for Shanalytics. But I'm actually doing my first live FSU show this weekend as well. So if you're interested, you definitely be on the lookout for that. I know it's not the same crowd, but I do want to show everyone. My guy, I put it out there on Twitter, Mr. Roscoe's, he made an excellent background for my new show, Jack. I mean, really shout out to him because this is some beautiful stuff.
I saw this, and this is it's pretty on point. I like it, the whole thing that you got Doak Campbell Stadium there. You've got the bullseye with the spear going into it and everything. I mean, that's a fantastic graphic. He knocked this thing out of the park.
Yeah, and I literally just asked him about it this afternoon. I mean, and Mr. Roscoe's is in the link in the description below because he's incredible. If you guys want graphics, please reach out to him. He is great with the work he does. I promise you will be satisfied. I know I was. But that'll be it, everyone. I will see you again on Saturday if I see you. But if not, I'll be back next week with all kinds of 49ers content. So that'll be it for me. Peace out, everyone.
Take care.